This is Amira Dali and Chris Chadon from eXp Realty. What we're doing here today is coming together and showing you what we believe is a very effective way of helping buyers go through a showing for a property. When I started as a new agent, Chris, you were ecstatic in helping me find my own home, and you had a particular way in showing a property that I've adapted in the last few years of being a real estate agent, and it has worked. So do you care to tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So whether it's a detached home, a townhouse, a condo, I have a system to show a house that's foolproof, that you don't miss any details, and you're gonna win your client over every time. When I started real estate in 2014, I was a buyer agent, and there was some fierce competition out there, especially on my team. So for me to win my clients over, I had to come up with a system of showing the house to become a showing expert rather than just a showing agent.
And in the last few years of me adapting Chris's system, I've shown competence, I've shown confidence. It's just provided that level of trust that the things I was pointing out in different homes that we were seeing, buyers weren't even paying attention to. Obviously, purchasing a home, people are always just looking at the outside, at the emotional side, at the physical side. But our job as sales agents are more like trusted advisors in pointing out certain things that buyers need to at least look out for.
So today we're going to look at a detached two-story home in Wendover in a rural setting that has a septic, that has a well, that has a few key components of a rural home.
Rural in these?
Good point. Let's get ready.
Chris, those are really nice boots.
Thank you so much. So, too many times in my real estate career, I showed up with my fancy little shoes in the winter time. And here's the thing, when you're buying a car, what do? Do you walk around the car, or do you just show the inside of the car? So you want to be comfortable, especially in a setting like this, to be able to walk around, look at things like the roof, the windows from outside, the soffit, the foundation. So bring your boots, dress accordingly, and maybe it's a good idea to tell your clients to do the same just so that they can follow you around.
I typically do that on the inside as well. If you're going in with heels and you're going to be barefoot, bring an extra pair of slippers or socks.
Crocs.
I tell my clients,
Bring Crocs.
Is that your style?
No.
So you never know. Sometimes basements are not finished. Bring out an extra pair of shoes and tell your clients to do so as well.
It's a great idea. So when I first get to a property with my clients and I'm about to show it, the first thing that I want to do is take a step back. You get a better vantage point of the house and the roof, because that's a big thing you want to look at. Here, the first thing you'll notice is that the shingles look fine, but after a few years, the sun beating down on it, the rain, the snow, you'll see that the shingles might start to curl at some spots. So it's a good indication that it's being worn out, and it'll need some attention soon, either fully replaced or just patched up.
And sometimes you'll find certain pieces missing because of a storm or wind. Those are not always a huge thing. They can easily be patched up, adding in the extra ones that are missing.
Exactly.
So just another thing. It doesn't mean the entire roof needs to be changed as well.
Exactly. So when you're looking at the roof, there's a few key components. There's also the eavesdropping that you want to look at. Here you can see the white downspouts at the bottom there. Seems to be like it's doing a good job. There's a bit of rust on it, but that's not a big deal. I think it's just from the wiring for the Christmas lights.
Yep.
But showing a house in the wintertime is the best time to see if the roof is doing a good job, especially the insulation in the attic. A roof like this won't hold a lot of snow, but if it's a flatter type roof and there's a lot of snow, it's like 3 feet of snow, it means that the insulation is good and it's keeping the warmth inside the house.
So Chris, I see also that this house has a chimney.
Right, which is also why I want to take a step back and look at the roof to see stuff like that. The chimney is often something that's overlooked. You can tell from the corner up there that it's cracked a little bit. It could be for different reasons. I'm not an inspector again, but you can tell that the chimney will need some repointing done. It's not a huge deal, but at least you can point it out to your clients. And you see that the bricks are cracked a bit. But we'll take a closer look from the other side.
Sounds good.
So the next step typically would be to walk around the house, look at the foundation, look at the ground to make sure that it's sloping away from the house. Now in a case like this, it's hard to tell because of the snow, but you still want to walk around and spot any other issues that they may encounter down the road. So let's go for a walk around the house.
So this house is brick house. Typically, a lot of times we see siding as well. So if you want to look at the different the different sidings, you'll see if there's pieces that are coming off. You'll see if pieces are sticking out. If it's dirty, that can easily be pressure washed as well. In this case, we're looking at a brick home. They look very well in good shape. There's nothing that's standing out in terms of falling other than the chimney, as you mentioned.
Exactly. That's why we're walking around, just to point out things that could be problematic. If you look at the corner there, you can see that the bricks are sort of missing some mortar.
Yep.
So things like that, when you point it out to your buyers, you look like a real winner, right? So every time.
And do it in a way that you're not scaring them that they have to spend this money.
No, exactly.
You know, I've heard from an inspector say it once that everything is fixable in a home, you just need the money.
Yeah.
So, but not everything is a must fix right away.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of snow today, so it's hard to see the foundation, but there's a window there and the window wells are covered in snow. So that's one thing you can point out to your clients, is that you want to make sure the snow is removed so that it doesn't become problematic and have water seeping through the windows in the basement. And another thing you want to do is, because this is on a well and septic, you want to find where the septic is. So in this case, if you look at the front of the house, it can't be in front because there's large trees. I mean, it could be, but then that would be very problematic for the septic, because it means the roots would be
Going through it.
going through the runs and just disrupting your whole system. In this case, the septic is at the back corner of the property. There's no trees that are too close from it, but there are trees around. So your inspector will want to look at that, make sure the roots are away from the septic field. So when it comes to the AC unit, it's really hard to know what year it was manufactured. There is a sticker on the side, but sometimes it's hidden in the serial number. So don't try to look for the year, but just look at it. You'll be able to tell right away if it's older or newer.
In the winter, typically you'll find people cover them. Sometimes they just have a piece of wood on top. Sometimes they actually case it. Again, if you can't see it, don't touch, don't remove stuff that people have already had on it.
So another thing that I usually look out for are vents, dryer vents, bathroom vents. They might be clogged. You'll see some lint coming out of it, especially the dryer vent.
Yep.
It's another thing I point out.
For things like the balcony as well, obviously you're not looking at the structural side because we're not the inspector, but looking if there is, sometimes there's posts, asking if there's a permit, if there was a permit done when it was built, if it is a new change to the house as well.
Yeah.
That would be something to point out.
Yeah.
So we talked originally that outside on rural properties you find the septic, but as well, because it is a rural property, it would be typically a well for water, right?
Yeah, so it can be, there's a few different types of wells. It can be a dug well, drilled well, it can be a sandpoint well. If there's no snow, you can sort of walk around and find it for your clients. But in this case, we can't really know where it is. But knowing the difference between the three can be a key component to your showings for sure. So the first thing when we walk into the house is that you want to see if you can spot any latent defects, something that you spot right away, that you don't need to remove drywall or stuff like that. So what do you see when you first walk in here?
I see the crack.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really
There's a crack
big one.
there. And if you turn around, there's another one there. So the whole point is not to destroy the house for your buyers, but it's to show that you're more than just a buyer agent. You're also there as a second set of eyes and ears, and to point out these defects that are not deal breakers, right? But why do you think there's a crack there, Amira?
Well, given that it's a straight line, it could be something with the drywall.
Yeah,
Usually
I'd
the
say so.
drywall are pieces that are completely rectangular, and it's a straight line, not something that's going diagonal.
Right, and one trick that I like to use, maybe not for a crack like this, but if you look at that one, just to make sure that it's not caused by water seeping through the house, point your camera and you'll see if there's any discoloration on the drywall, which it doesn't seem to be. But if you come on this side here, it looks like it bubbled up a little bit, the paint at one point. So it might be coming from the attic or the window up there.
So, question for you, could it also be the taping of the drywall? If they put the pieces of tape in between the drywall, could that be that it's peeling because
It could be. It could be. I mean, a house moves, right?
Over
And that's
time.
in my opinion, that's why there's a crack there.
Are these deal breakers or are they just aesthetics?
Aesthetics for sure, and I think it's always a good time to remind people, your buyers, that you're not an inspector. But the whole point of this exercise today is to show that you're not just a showing agent, you're also there to point these out and to calm them down.
Yep.
Or if you spot something that might be a deal breaker, it's a good time to let them know. So, right, remember when you were shopping, we just walk around the house, point at a few different things. Is there anything here that you're noticing?
I do notice that there's a little bit of discoloration in the top corner. Now, typically, when I'm talking to buyers, I always assume that there might be a washroom at the top
Yeah,
because it is the bottom floor versus the top floor.
yeah.
What would you say, is that also a deal breaker? How would you position that as well?
The first thing I look at, again, whip out the phone, take out your flashlight, and you see that it's a little bit yellowish, right? There's a certain spot there that looks like it's a little bit yellow. If it was an ongoing issue, you'd see the stain a lot more, what's the
Darker.
word? Darker.
Like a darker.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'd see more rings of stains, but it looks like at one point maybe there was a leak.
From the bathtub or something?
Yeah, or something like coming out of the tub without being fully dry or something like that may cause something like that.
Sometimes I've seen it looks like a belly, like a big belly.
Then that's a big issue, right? Because you know that it's been ongoing for months or years. But this seems like it's something that happened a long time ago and it's not reoccurring. Unless they painted over it, but you don't see any rolls of paint over or anything.
Yes.
There's no signs of that.
There's also times where I've seen in homes where people are smokers,
Yeah,
yellow discolorations around the rims.
absolutely, for
So
sure.
that's something else to take a look at in terms of if you do have an allergy for smoking, then look at the
Yeah.
edges, see if there is.
It doesn't smell like cigarettes, and if it does, there is a way that you can get rid of it. Painting, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you can hire a cleaning company that will bomb the place. It's basically a smoke bomb that goes into any nook and crannies to destroy the odor.
Got it.
So another thing that I'd like to point at is the fireplace here. The pilot seems like it's turned off. I never go and try to turn it on to see if it works. We're not an inspector and we're not gas technicians.
Nope.
But then a question that we would frequently get is, why is it dirty like this? Well, from years of usage, this might happen, but you can hire companies to clean it. It's not a big deal.
The question I always get as well is how do you turn it on? So typically, I believe these open up.
Yes.
One of these would have to open up.
So underneath is a trap door,
Yep.
and you can turn the gas on that way. I don't advise to do that because, it's playing with gas. If the pilot isn't on, don't touch it.
'Kay.
It's just something that you can point out to your buyers, that if you're going through the inspection, you can check it out.
And typically there's a switch in the basement, right, that should be turning it on during certain times of the year.
It could be,
Okay.
or it could be a switch on the wall, and it goes with the temperature of the room. So if you crank it up, this will turn on to help heat the room quicker.
Okay.
Another thing too, so while we're on the main floor, windows is a big thing, right? So always open up the curtains as best as possible, just to see the conditions of the windows.
Sometimes there's the date on the windows.
Yes, depending on the model of the window, whether it's there or not, if you're showing to your buyer clients that you know where to look for the date, it's a big key factor for them to choose you rather than to choose another buyer agent, right? So look at the frame inside the window. Sometimes the date is stamped. That's the manufacturer date. It doesn't mean that it was installed
Installed on that
that
date.
year, but it doesn't seem like this model has it. Oh, sorry, yeah, right here. So you can see 08. So if you look closely, so it's a vinyl window manufactured in 08. Or, we're not pros here, but it could be 09. So there's the 08 date and 09. So, but you can tell that they're newer windows, vinyl windows, no issues there.
Yes. In terms of identifying if they're older windows, sometimes as well, even if they're not old, they could be foggy.
Yeah, so they sometimes lose their gas between the two window panes. It's more of an eyesore than anything else. It's not a big deal. You can hire companies that will drill holes and refill the
Fill it up.
gas. It only lasts a couple years. If you want it to be completely,
Aesthetic.
yeah, exactly. If you want it to be gone completely, that's another story. So that's pretty much it for this space here. Anything else you want to add?
There is a washroom on this floor.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can.
When it comes to showers too, you want to look at the base of the windows, the glass doors. Sometimes these tend to leak. And if you look at this spot here, you can tell that there's some water seepage going through the window. So it's something that you'd want to address at the time of inspection or negotiation.
There are also washrooms that don't have fans sometimes. You'll see it in a lot of older homes.
Yeah.
That is something that the inspector will also look at as well.
Yeah.
So always check to see if there is a fan in the washroom. That helps with the humidity. When you're taking a shower, it gets really steamy in here. Always turn on the fan.
Yeah.
But some washrooms don't actually have them.
So if you don't have a fan, you have to make sure there's a window. So that's a grandfathered in type clause where if there's no fan, which there isn't here,
There is.
you do have a window.
I think
Well, okay,
There
I
you
just
go.
thought that was a heat lamp. That's really cool, actually.
this was when I had to press a lot of buttons to find that one.
There you go. So there's a few spots in the house that there's cracks
Yep.
due to settlement in the house, right? Not a big deal. Patch it over, patch and paint, and it'll go. So that's pretty much it. When it comes to sinks, whether it's kitchen or washrooms, look underneath, turn it on.
Okay.
There seems to be something happening there. I don't know if it's newer piping, but again, take out the camera, or the phone, sorry, and flashlight. So there was some leaking going on there for a little while because there's a bit of rot at the base of the shelves. So again, it's something you want to look at. Again, we're not inspectors, but when you're walking around the house with your buyers and you point these things out, you're going to win their confidence over 10 out of 10 times.
So typically as well, I mean, we can't open the water here because the water's been turned off.
Yeah.
But if you open the water and try in here and as well in the shower, and you try flushing the toilet, it can show you as well the water pressure of the house.
Yeah,
So-
especially here that we're on a well and a septic. So pressure can often be an issue with these homes.
So if someone's taking a shower and you flush the toilet, hot or cold water is going to come down on it.
Yeah, exactly.
So this one has a really, really beautiful stairwell.
Yes.
Sometimes, depending on your buyers, if they have kids, if it's a big family, you want to maybe point out certain things about it. It looks really beautiful, but again, it is hardwood. It is wood, and it's not carpet.
Yeah. Well, if you want to show your buyers you care, you want to point out the fact that it's slippery.
Yes.
You and I both work with a lot of first-time home buyers with kids, young families. Stuff like that could be hazardous. It's not a deal breaker. You point things out like that, shows you care, and shows that it's something that they have to keep in mind, because buyers show up, they're excited, they look at the big picture, they don't look at all the small details.
It becomes very emotional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One thing too that you'll notice, spiral staircases like this, they often shake a lot. So they may need extra support.
So going from the living space, we have the dining room space. Sometimes you have the open concept, but in some cases, the older homes or the more traditional, you come into the dining room space. It's important to figure out if there's a door, sliding doors. This is pretty wide open, like it's not easy to tell.
Absolutely. It's often a cool feature that's forgotten.
Yeah.
These pocket doors, you want to open them up to see if they're in good shape. You know, like you can see there's some paint over here. It's just a plastic, but they're in decent shape. But like I've seen people move into their house and
Not know.
without knowing that they have pocket doors. So a cool feature to point out. Now the first thing that pops up to me, to my eyes, in this room here is a nice big bay window. Lots of natural light, cool feature. But what do you see here?
They're a little older.
It's a little older, most likely original. It's a wood frame inside. I don't see any problems, and the fact that outside is covered with a porch, there's less weather damage
Onto the windows.
onto the window. But you can see outside is capped with aluminum, so that's a non-issue. If you look at the frame inside, is there a year, is there a date? Can you spot it for me? It's not always there.
It is repainted, so I
Yeah.
don't, sometimes you can tell that it has been repainted.
But it's not the same type of window as the other room. So
No,
this might
so-
be an older window. I don't see any issues. It's just you want to point it out to your buyers.
The other thing I noticed in this room, or in this house in general, there's a lot of molding happening.
Yeah.
There's certain cracks, the moldings kind of chip away. That's just aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly.
People will usually pinpoint that out, oh, look at that damage. But in most cases, it's more aesthetic than it is
It's one of those
particularly
things
damaged.
it's an easy fix, but it's not an issue. So for the kitchen, the few things that you can look at are appliances if they're included. One thing that you mentioned that I thought was a really good idea is the dishwasher.
Yeah.
Some people don't use it. It might be smelly, musty,
Moldy.
moldy. So check it out, open it up.
Yeah.
Seems like it's in good shape.
Yep.
Inspectors, when they inspect the house, they'll look real quick at the appliances, but they won't give a report on appliances.
Yeah.
You're buying the appliances with the house, but you know, if you want to add more value to your showing experience, check out the the oven and see if it's in good shape or not. Open it up. Clients will appreciate it. One thing too that I like to check out sometimes is if the vent is venting outside. So if you open up the cupboard here, you see that it's vented, most likely going up and to the left outside. The reason why I'm pointing this out, because sometimes it's just a filter that you have to replace.
Which is typically seen in like the microwave type of vents.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It doesn't matter, like it's just that you want to know that it's vented outside because it's a better system
To have.
than just having a filter. Again, we look at the windows here. Is it the same type that we saw in front? It looks like it's a different window here again. It's stamped from 92, this one.
Wow.
So a few different years, few different windows.
Usually you can tell from the knob as well.
Yeah,
If you realize the other one has a folded knob versus this one, it's just the old,
yeah,
which
exactly.
could get stuck.
Exactly. But it doesn't matter if all windows are different years. You want to look at any discrepancies, any damage caused.
Shall we check out upstairs?
Let's go.
Alrighty. So the first thing I notice when we're going up here is the neon lights. The molding and the neon lights.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a feature on its own, right? Like it's
Yeah.
it's something worth pointing out because it's there.
Could hold
Personally, I'm
dust
not a
as
big,
well.
Big fan, but yeah.
There's one thing that I do want to point out that I've seen with rural properties is the ladybugs.
Yes.
Lots and lots of ladybugs. You can see there's some bugs happening over there as well. If certain times with the windows, the doors, because you're in a rural property, it's something that's very hard to avoid unless you're spraying your backyard as well.
I agree. So there's no big issue with those. It's just that it can be annoying, especially when you have a window so
High up.
so high up.
Yep.
You can see that there's a bit of a mess of ladybugs there. And again, that looks like a bit of a newer window. Seems like it's the same age as the door here.
You can also see that there's some deterioration in the wood inside.
Yeah, it's a wood
It's
frame
much
window.
older.
That's what tends to happen with the frame, the wood frame, is that they get rotten after a while, just due to the condensation sitting on it. So one thing that I always like to do when we're on the top floor, knowing that there's an attic above this room, if there's a lack of insulation in the attic, it creates a space that has no insulation, right? So the warm air from the house will exit through the attic and then create condensation. And it's often on the side of the walls. So again, the camera is a great tool for that. So if you look up, if you see any discoloration, that might be because there's a lack of insulation and there's condensation in your attic. It's not the case here, but your flashlight's your best tool for sure.
I would always look for the attic door as well. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
in the closet, sometimes it's in the hallway.
Yeah.
Older homes I've seen do not have an attic sometimes. Where could it be if you can't find it inside?
It's a good question. So more often than not, it'll be inside the house. If there's an attached garage, it will be in the garage. And if it's not there at all, if you go outside the house and you look at the gable end, so at the end of the house, in the peak, you might see like a square door type
Vent thingy, yeah.
vent thing that you can
Yeah.
remove and go inside from there. It's not ideal, but I've seen that before.
Are there homes that have no attic?
It's very rare. I know you've come across
Yeah.
that. It's not a big deal. The only thing that's not fun is that you can't really inspect it all that well. Some inspectors have an infrared gun that can take a look and see if there's any discrepancies through the infrared tool. But other than that, you can put a condition that it's conditional upon having access to the attic. Yeah, so there's not much you can do during your showings with your buyer clients when it comes to the attic. What you can look out for is the attic hatch. One thing that I often notice is if you look at the corners, if there's discoloration, again, it's because there's cold air seeping through or warm air exiting the house going into the attic. It's problematic as it can create mold inside the attic. The quick fix for that is to add a weather strip around your hatch, but it looks fine. So you can only point out what you see, and that's the only thing that I would say about the attic for a house like this.
So going in, this is a really, really nice bathroom. But originally, if you recall, we were looking downstairs at the little bit of discoloration that was completely right under this tub.
Yes.
So do you usually, it's a scary thing for someone to think that their tub is leaking into their living space. Is there quick fixes for it, in your opinion?
So I think the most common thing that I notice is a lack of caulking around the tub. You go in and out of your tub, water leaks everywhere. So you can see that there's no caulking around the tub. So that would be the first thing that I would look out for. So your buyers might think it's a big issue that there's a stain on the ceiling, but looking at this, I think to me it's pretty obvious what the issue is, and it's a simple fix. Again, if it was an ongoing issue, your stain would be much bigger. Even if it was covered in paint, you'd see it.
You'd still see it.
Yeah. Again, the other thing to point out is always looking under the sinks, see if there's any leak. Looks fine. Window, same as we did earlier. Just a friendly reminder, turn on your flashlight, look at the walls, the top of the walls, and you look at the ceiling, no discoloration. So yeah. Fan is dirty, but
Very
that's
dirty.
not a big issue. Just get it cleaned. When it comes to the fan, if it's noisy and you want to make sure that it's working, one thing you can do is just grab a piece of toilet paper or Kleenex, turn the fan on. If you're tall enough, stick it there. It works fine.
So usually when you're going with buyers, especially if it's a couple or a family, they're kind of out looking at their own little thing. Sometimes agents just don't know what to do with themselves. They either go on their phone, they fiddle. But if you go into a room like this where there's not much to point out per se, how would you handle that?
That's a really good question. So they tend to steer off the whole point, and the whole point is to see the house and find any issues with it. But while you let them walk around and ask their questions without looking like you're bored or looking like you don't have anything to do really, I always take out my phone and I with the flashlight again, I look at the corners of the walls, the ceilings, so you always look like you're doing something while having a conversation with them to try to gain their trust, right? And get to know your client's needs and wants and stuff like that. There's not always something to look out for, but every room has a ceiling, so always look at that. Look at the corners because that's often a problematic area in rooms and windows. So let's go check out the basement.
Shall we? So going into the basement, the first thing I see that's an issue here is that there's no railing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's hazardous for kids or animals or even adults, but like it's a gap that you want to fill up. an inspector will point it out right away. But
Yep.
if you're quicker than your inspector, because you're taking your clients out for showings, that's something that you want to point out. Makes it look like you know what you're talking about.
In this case, we have a finished basement.
Yeah.
There's mixed feelings about going to show a fully finished basement versus a not finished basement. There's certain things that it's harder to tell when it's a finished basement, but there's still certain things that you should be looking out for
Right.
when you can't see behind in terms of the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. So it comes back to what I was saying earlier. The only thing that you can look at are spots that you know can be problematic. Same as the ceilings and corners of bedrooms and stuff like that, or rooms on the main floor. When it comes to basements, your corners are the parts of the basement that are most prone to water seeping through. And that's usually caused by downspouts outside that aren't extended enough away from the house. So here, like you said, it's a finished basement. The first thing that I would do is walk over to the corners and see if we can spot any water damage stains or stuff like that. It's happened to me before where I touched the corner with my hand and it was soft. So you could tell that it's an ongoing issue with the water.
Because we're in a basement with, windows that are, half up, half down as well, you can typically, if there is water damage seeping through the windows, because as you can see over there, there's snow sitting.
Yeah.
So water could seep through. In this case, we're looking at the windows. They look much newer than than some older ones we've seen.
Yeah.
What would you pay attention to when you're looking at those types of windows?
The corners, always
Yeah.
the corners. Sometimes you'll see a crack on the corner of the wall here where the frame of the window is. And you can tell that it's full of snow. Once that starts melting, especially on a day like today, it's a little bit mild out there. Snow will melt. If it's got nowhere to go, it's going to want to go through the cracks of the window. I can feel a little bit of wind coming in here, so water's definitely going to seep through. And like there's no damage caused right now, but if we get another big snowstorm, that could be problematic. So always remind your buyers to remove the snow from the window wells. But there's no issues here, so I'm not
usually
anticipating
it's
any
like cracks
problems.
in the corner.
One thing that you asked me earlier was how do you know where the
Electrical
panel is? People tend to hide them behind frames.
Yes.
And you found it pretty quickly earlier. So behind there is your electrical panel. So that's definitely one thing that you want to look out for in the basement.
Don't be too worried and snooping around people's homes.
No, exactly.
But you need to figure out where it is, because it is an important aspect to see what kind of electrical panel that you have, how the wiring looks. Again, you're not an inspector, but there's certain things that you can tell look wrong.
So when it comes to talking about electrical stuff like that, I'm a big fan of KISS, the band for sure, and second, keeping it simple, stupid. So when it comes to a panel like this, don't talk about what you don't know. Stuff that are obvious, like there's obviously the panel that's missing, the cover of the panel, and the electrical box there isn't covered, and there's a little bit of black on it, which tells me the wires are live, and you just want to stay away from that. So don't play around with it.
Don't touch anything.
Don't touch anything. But you want to make sure that you're able to tell your clients if your panel is filled with fuses or breakers. They're often going to ask you, is it a 100 amp panel? Is it a 200 amp panel? If you don't know, just say you don't know. But one easy trick, usually, you look at the big breaker there, and the number on it is a good indication as to
taking out the light,
how much it is. So in this case, it doesn't seem to say, oh, it says 200. So it's a 200 amp panel, or it could be anyways. So it's pretty much the extent of what you have to explain about the panel, but I see a few issues there that your inspector will point out.
So typically, Chris, when we're looking at homes, we always obviously look at the furnace. Rural homes, sometimes the older ones might have different types of furnaces. I think there's oil furnaces, there's gas, forced air furnaces.
Yeah, and there's also electrical. In this case, it's natural gas. One thing that I always look out for is the year of the furnace. It's not always on the listing. One way you can find out what year it is by looking at the tag on the gas supply. So here it says 2009, which is a good indication that the furnace might have been installed in 2009. It's not always the case, it's not always accurate,
Yeah.
but it points out to the fact that it's not original. 2009 is getting up there in years, but it seems to be working fine. When the inspector looks inside, he'll find the manufacturing date of the actual furnace. Unfortunately, we can't do that, but I always look at the tag and
Yeah.
point out that, hey, it's 2009. Good chances are that the furnace is from 2009.
There's also sometimes a sticker that either shows when it was inspected or when
Yeah.
it was last cleaned. So those numbers might be off or at different times of the years. So
Yeah.
just make sure that you're looking at those as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We just heard the water.
Yes, so
So-
that's your sump pump. So your sump pump is in the corner here. One thing that I usually look out for is I listen, and if you keep hearing water going in, it means that it's very wet around. So one way to protect yourself from floods is to have a backup, a battery backup for your sump pump. In this case, there isn't. So it's something that I usually point out.
We see here there's this like oxygen like tank. This is a rural property, Chris. So there's a little bit of difference between looking at the water system on a rural property versus in the city. In this case, what we see here is a water softener. Now, again, we're not inspectors, we're not, we don't know all the details of the systems, but just identifying that, what would you say stands out to you?
So the first thing that I look out for is the tank itself. Are they rusted? Do they need to be changed anytime soon? I don't go into too much details as to what does what, because it depends on the system. Here I can see there's a salt water softener system here with your pressure tanks for the well, for the water to come inside the house. I don't go any further into explanation than that, but you can point out the fact that the tanks look like they're newer, there's no rust around it. An older tank, the bottom will be all rusted, which is a good sign that it needs to be changed.
So speaking of water, Chris, what other system do we need to look out for?
Yeah, so there's a hot water tank.
Of course,
The
yeah.
typical tank is about, our height. That's a typical system, but in this case, it's a tankless water on-demand system. So there's always hot water in the house. It takes a little bit longer for the water to become at the temperature that you'd like, but it's on demand. It's never ending. So that's what we're seeing here. One of the questions I often get asked is it owned or rented? If you look on the tank itself, it says it's tankless, but there's an actual tank anyways. But there's usually a sticker on it from a company if it's a rental.
So it's 2008. And
So about the same year as the furnace,
Yeah.
which would make sense.
Yeah.
But again, I don't go into
The
too much
details.
details, but you can point out that it's a tankless rather than
What I typically
A
do
typical tank.
with the water as well is if it's not a tankless and you have the full tank as well, like you mentioned for the water softener system, is look if there's any rust. At the same time, another way that you'd be able to check if there's any rust is if you open the water in the washroom sinks, you look at the color of the water, the hot water. If it comes out a little bit yellowy or a little bit reddish, that means the tank inside is starting to rust as well.
If we're talking about rural properties, that could be an issue, or your water could have iron, but that's a whole other topic. But yeah, you're right. So I think, again, to go back to the KISS method, keep it simple, just point out the fact that it's a tankless rather than a hot water tank. People tend to go past that. They forget to look at those details.
Yeah. And some people are some people prefer rented, some people prefer to own it as well. So those are important aspects to make sure that your buyers are aware of them.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're explaining these mechanical parts of the house to your clients, obviously don't tamper with them, don't touch them, but just point it out. Point out the fact that it's either gas powered, electrical powered, propane, or oil. In this case, it's natural gas here. So when it comes to basements are a hole in the ground, right? So one thing that you want to make sure that you look out for is the exterior walls. Look at the bottom. Sometimes the trim will be discolored, yellowish. Doesn't seem to be the case here. And especially the corners of the rooms. If you see that the paint is bubbling up a little bit, you know that there's a water issue going on there. but so far so good. It's a beautiful house.
So the other thing is, since we did see a little bit of stains at the top floor with the washrooms, is identifying the basement as well if there is washrooms, and see if there are any stains or discoloration. In this case, there isn't any, but just something to keep in mind. So typically with basements as well, the other thing that's asked is there a rough-in? So identifying whether there is a rough-in for a washroom in the basement as well.
It's not always obvious, but the quick way to find out is when you walk around in the basement, you'll see black pipes sticking out, or either from the ground or the walls. In this case, there aren't any, so we can't really show it.
Yeah.
But it's also a good question to ask the listing agent. Don't pretend like you know, but you'll know it's there when you see it.
So that typically is the last portion of looking at the house on the inside, is the basement.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
So the whole point of this exercise today is to show you that any house you walk into, whether it's a detached home, bungalow, 2 stories, or a townhouse, or semi-detached, or even a condo, there are things you can follow, steps you can follow, that whenever you meet with someone, you know you have a game plan. It's like having a listing package set up, or a listing presentation. But if you repeat these things every time you're showing a house, you're gonna win your clients over every time.
It's going to show you confidence, competence, and you're going to know what to do instead of sitting on your phone or reading the MLS paper.
Yeah.
It's going to bring more engaging conversations. And like Chris said, keep it simple. You don't have to go into specific details. You're not an inspector. You're just pointing out certain things that they're going to pay attention to, that they're going to ask maybe their inspector as well, which just another level of professionalism. And really, we're not sales representatives. I think we're more of trusted advisors of pointing those things out to potential buyers. So that concludes our showing for today. We hope you're able to take at least 1 to 3 things that you'll be able to carry on for your showings that will help you stand out from other agents.
Exactly, and I have a feeling that this year and next year will be very competitive for buyer agents out there. So if you show homes and you have a tactic going in, you'll win your clients over every time. Thank you so much for watching this today. If you have questions, you know who to reach out to.